train normally on experiential Jewish education, but one of the core pieces of our work is working with people and working with teams. Doesn't matter what you do or any of that kind of, you know, all of the great content of experiential Jewish education. At the end of the day, most of your work and my work is about managing other people. And so tools for team building is always really helpful. And I think we can all get better at it, however much we've done it and whatever our team is like. So that's what we're going to be doing. Last week, we talked about motivating other people, how to convince them to do things you want them to do them, how to use values to excite people to their work, how to use our passion, what channels of persuasion. That was last week. This week, we're going to do something completely different. And we're going to talk about the core building blocks of teamwork or working with other people in general. And the core building blocks, in my opinion, are listening and asking good questions. That is it. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter what else we're doing, but if we can listen well and ask the right questions, then we can really get the most out of the people that we work with. If we know how to listen for what's being said and what's not being said, and we know how to ask the questions that people can respond to, then our teams will function better and we can do our jobs better. So that's really what we're going to do. It's pretty simple. It is not rocket science. It's something that I think most of us do. Most of us could do better, and certainly practice is always worthwhile. So that's basically what we're going to do today. The first thing I would like you to do, just because some people know each other and other people don't, what I would like you to do is to just rename yourself for a second. And if you don't know how to do that, you go into your little box, the square with your photo, with your video in it. On the top right-hand side, there's a little blue box with 3 dots. In that box with 3 dots, it will allow you an option to rename yourself. What I would just like you to do is to leave your first name, put where you live, which city you live in, and which M² program you were part of. So if you were part of more than one, just pick one. If you're never part of an M² program, just put where you work, or at least sort of like as much as you can to just give us some orientation to you. Otherwise, just tell me, let's see where we were all from, because we were all in different M² programs across the generations and across the different things that we do. So it's just a good idea to get a sense. We were in Chicago, we're in Ithaca, New York, we're in Connecticut, we're in California, we're in Toronto, even though we haven't seen that quite yet pop up. That's about to pop up. Brooklyn. Oh, Noah is in Atlanta. He's going to be here in a minute. New Jersey. What have we got? Who am I missing? Emily's in Memphis. Who am I missing? A couple in Chicago. Okay, so we're covering the North America. Sorry if I missed anybody's location, but we're all here. Okay, good. So let's just see what we're doing right now. Okay, so this is our outline. Here we are. This is what we're doing. The first thing we're going to do, like we did last week, is we're going to focus a little bit on the team that you're going to be working with. We're going to ask some different questions this time than last time, but you're all going to be thinking about a team that you have in mind. Who are the people who you want to activate and inspire and work with? And then we're going to do a series of listening exercises in groups of 3. Each time we do it in a group of 3, one person will be talking, one person will be listening, and the third person will be observing and taking notes and sharing with the others. Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult because obviously we're on Zoom, and the threesome, you'll be in a breakout room with 3 people, but the observation and the listening and the body language is a bit more complicated and probably not as good as if you were in the same room. So we're going to be having to deal with that. But I think it'll work, and I think we'll learn new things. But I guess we're just going to have to take account of the fact that listening in person to somebody in the same room is a little bit different than listening to them when you're looking kind of at your computer screen. And then we're going to be talking about questions, good questions, better questions, less good questions, and then what are we taking away? Okay, very simple. We're going to be divided into the groups of 3. Emily is getting ready as I speak to divide you and send you through the cyberspace space, whatever atmosphere, into a group of 3 people. We're going to do the first exercise, classic listening. The way it's going to work is this. Somebody needs to be a timekeeper. Let's say the observer each time needs to be the timekeeper, and you need a stopwatch or a clock. You're going to take roles. Each time, 1 speaker, 1 listener, observer. You do it 3 times, so everybody gets 1 role each time. And it will go like this. The person who is speaking is going to have 3 minutes on the clock to talk about your team and the relationships between the people in the team. If you've already got this written out, you can explain it. You only have 3 minutes to explain it. And the speaker is speaking and the listener is listening, and the listener is not allowed to say anything except to listen. And the observer is just paying attention and taking notes to what that's like. Okay, and then you're going to finish that 3 minutes, and then you're going to switch around, and then you're going to switch around again. And all of that will take total probably 11 or 12 minutes. And by that point, Emily will be bringing you back. Okay, that is what we're going to do. Any questions before we go into small groups?
We have that that breakdown so that we can see it during the groups?
Yes, we will send it to you so that you can see it through the groups. And by the time you get the hang of it anyway, it will be really clear. Good to see you, Noah. So yes, okay, so you'll be in a threesome and you're going to talk about the team, whatever it is you want to describe to the others about the team. Okay, Emily, are you ready to send everybody away? Emily, you've got me going to breakout room 4. Do I want to go to breakout room 4? Should I say later? You're on mute.
Hey.
I'm not going to go there, or should I go there? Do they need me?
Do you want to go there?
Not particularly, unless they need me, unless there's like a threesome.
No. So Hannah needs, wanted to know the time breakdown again.
Okay, so tell them 3 minutes each. 3 minutes each. One person speaks, one person listens, one person observes. And 3 minutes for each round. Talk about your team.
Okay. So then with you, sorry, including you, I guess there could have been one more group of 3. And then, oh, dread.
Is there one group of 2? Is there one group of 2?
So there's actually, dang it, there's 3 groups of 2 because.
Okay, so then just tell them, if you're a group of 2, just take 4 minutes each and there's no observer.
Okay. So Yahav, Toronto, and breakout room 6 asked me to join. So once. Okay, so I had just answered the question when they asked about the group of 2, so they were good.
Okay, fine. You can pause the recording. Next time you need to stick to the timing so everybody gets time. Okay. All right, hello everyone, welcome back. We are going to do a quick poll. Emily's going to ask you on the screen, which did you prefer? Being a listener or being a speaker? You have to choose one, you cannot choose both. If you really had to choose, what do you prefer? Ooh.
That was easy for me.
Really? There's such a, wow. Okay. 12 people prefer to be a listener, and only 2 people prefer to be a speaker. Fascinating. Okay. There we go. That's what you all just told us. Very interesting. Okay, so let's.
I lied. I totally was not being honest. I prefer to be a speaker. And so did all of you. Fess up. Let's go.
I actually prefer to be the listener.
Okay, so let's talk.
One mouth for a reason.
Exactly. Right. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Right. That's what we say. So let's see what we do know now about being a listener and being a speaker. What did you? First of all, you can write in the chat, or you're also like just wave your hand and then you can jump in to say something. Let's talk about listening for a minute. What did you notice about listening now? Did you enjoy it? Was it hard? Was it difficult, especially virtually? What would it like to listen? Most of you claim that you prefer being a listener. So now what do we know about being a listener?
Ira?
I was going to say that I found myself enlarging the screen to speaker view and putting the little picture of myself directly below my camera, because I could see myself looking at my own image to see what I looked like and realize that wasn't what the speaker was seeing. She was seeing my eyes going off to the side. So I repositioned it so that I could be focused, so that I would send the message that I was listening.
Right. Right.
I was disconcerted by my own body language.
Yes. Yes, it does answer your question. On Zoom, you really should be looking at the camera. If I'm looking at my camera now, I'm looking at the camera. But if I'm looking at myself, I think I'm looking under the camera, so it's less good for you all. So what's the contrast between the words and body language? Who said that?
Yeah, no,
Joanna, where are you?
Sarah, as I was listening to you, I found that there was some critique and frustration, yet you presented with a smile throughout the entire thing. And so without interpreting that, I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Joanna. I didn't say hello before. Welcome. So what else? What else helped to do listening? It's harder to be quiet when there's something you want to say rather than something that you want to find out. Yes. Who found themselves wanting to say things?
Oh, I failed and asked a question. I failed. I was like, tell me more about this. Yeah.
It's hard. It's really, really hard not to say anything. And that was part of the thing. So what do we learn from that? Yeah, Jessica.
I just wanted to say, I feel like my training as an oral historian came in handy because I was used to affirming physically and not verbally and holding off on my questions. But yeah, I mean, I think folks wanted to have an active conversation, and that includes being thoughtful and processing it and learning more by asking questions.
Right. Yeah. Julie?
I was just going to say that I know that I wrote in the chat that it was difficult to not ask questions, but on the contrary, it also, knowing that you can't ask questions makes you able to focus more on what the other person is saying, instead of thinking of what do I want to say, what do I want to ask, what am I going to say next?
Right. Yeah. I think we'll talk about this in a minute. A lot of time when we're really listening, we're actually not listening, we're actually planning the next thing to say. The next question, the next agreement, the next thing. So when you're forced not to be able to say anything, it reminds you that, there's actually just listening is a very active process. Yes, Jeremy.
I feel myself, I generally prefer listening. I was so excited to talk about this team and the context, especially since a lot of it was developed very differently during our enforced time away. I was like, actually, I want to tell you more, and I've got 3 minutes. So, okay, I got to focus right now.
Right. What about being What about then when you were speaking? What was that like? You had 3, or some of you had 4 whole minutes to speak. What was it like to be a speaker? Most of you claim you didn't like that part as much. Jeremy?
I mean, similarly, it was okay. I had this very precious time. I want to give people a full context so that they can give me thoughtful, meaningful responses that are fair to them. And it was just like, okay, I was prepared to talk about this team. Like, oh wait, I don't feel adequate to describing like how awesome these people I have the privilege of leading are. So what do I now do to try to like encapsulate the greatness of this group in such a short window?
Okay. It's always a discipline to try and capture something very briefly. It's very hard. What about being a speaker? Who else liked being a speaker? Hard to know whether you're reaching people when they're silent. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So what can you do if you're silent, but you still want to show that you're listening? What were you guys doing? What works for you?
Through Zoom, just nodding heads, a lot of nodding.
Right, a lot of nodding. Right, I'm moving my head up and down rather vigorously. Visual facial clues.
Smile.
There are, right, the thumbs up, there are reactions, right, like this one, that kind of thing. Facial gestures. I mean, especially in Zoom, I think you have to do it all much bigger, right? Like when you're on TV or when you're acting on a stage, you have to like do it much bigger to make the same point. Leaning in, yes. Those physical things become much more important, but I think they really are important even if you're in person. Like they really, especially if you can't say anything, it's really critical. So I want to share just a framing before we go back and do our second listening exercise. And this is a framing about different types of listening. So as you were listening to your people and you yourself were being listened to, I want you to consider the idea about 3 levels of listening. This comes from like coaching theory and I think psychology as well, which talks about 3 levels of listening. In the first level of listening, I'm doing what some of you mentioned, which is so-and-so's talking to me, and I'm thinking actually about myself. I'm thinking about how that touches me. Oh, you just told me a really interesting story about your boss. I have a boss, and my boss seems to be really like you or your boss, and so I'm going to tell you all about my boss as well. Or, you know, you're telling me a sad story about something in your situation, and I'm thinking to myself, oh yes, I totally get it. I've had the same situation. And really my focus is on myself when you're talking. I'm listening to you for sure, but the focus is on how I'm responding and how I'm going to respond back to you and the next thing I'm going to say. Level two listening is when I'm focusing on the needs of my partner. So I'm not thinking about my boss or my situation. I'm thinking about, what do you need here? You're telling me about your boss or your colleague. What do you need? Maybe you need to vent, or maybe you need me to ask you some clarifying questions. Maybe you need to solve a problem. And I'm really listening very carefully about your needs. Level 3 listening is another even deeper level of listening, where you're actually listening to the whole picture of what someone is saying. And the whole picture is what they're saying and what they're not saying. So it's a kind of somewhat intangible level of listening where you're really in the zone, listening to that person. And the specifics even sometimes disappear because you're really focusing on the whole thing. Maybe somebody's sharing something that sounds as if they're, quite happy with a situation. But, you have an inkling that really behind that, there's some kind of loss or some kind of grief. And they didn't say it, but you're listening to them really carefully and you're understanding that level. It's a bit like maybe even in Jewish translation, you say, it's like the white spaces between the black words are just as important as the words themselves. It's whether the whole picture of what the person's saying and not saying, the history that they have, the way that they're saying it, just everything about that experience is the third level of listening. So I want to present this just as a way of thinking. next time you listen to somebody, we're going to practice another example in a minute, but next time you listen to somebody in your team, what level listening are you using? And they're all useful. I would definitely not say that level 1 is bad. It's not bad at all. But if we really want to properly listen deeply and really understand the people that we're working with, we also need to focus sometimes on second and third level listening and be more conscious of it. So when you're listening to somebody in a supervision meeting talking about, you know, the work that they're doing and the task list they have and their challenges, you could listen on level 1 or 2 or 3. And the more that you try and push yourself to listen on level 3, I think the deeper the relationships will be and the more effective the listening is going to be as well. So with that in mind, we're going to do another listening exercise. First of all, any clarifications or questions on that? Yes, Jess.
I'm thinking about situations in which, you know, a friend shares something personal and deep and wants validation that you hear them or it resonates, and, you know, in turn I offer my own story, which they might, my hope is like they'll feel less alone and like they understand me because I've connected these two experiences together. I mean, what level would that be? I guess it's not just focusing on myself because it's trying to meet their needs in some way.
So I think that would be level 2.
Okay.
I think the question there is always the question of who am I serving in this moment? If I'm serving myself because I just have this story that I want to tell because it'll make me feel better, and this is a great opportunity to tell it, that's level 1. If I'm telling this for it to serve them, then that would still be level 2. Their need is to hear from somebody who's gone through something similar, and my story can really serve them. I would say that's level 2. And that's always something that I think that it's helpful to ask oneself is, who am I serving when I'm telling those stories? And level 3 would be to say, you know, also, you might tell the story in level 3, but it's more likely that you're listening bigger and it's less about you in level 3. Does that make sense? Okay, any other clarifications on the levels of listening? Then we're going to practice it again. So we're going to go do another listening exercise. You're going to go back into the same pair or group of 3.
I think there's
Slightly different rules this time. Slightly different rules. First of all, you definitely need to time it so that everybody gets their time. This time though, you only have, if you're in a group of 3, you have 2 minutes each, right? So it's a bit shorter. If you're in a group of 2, you have 3 minutes each, okay? So 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And this time what you're going to talk about your team, but specifically, you're going to talk about the ideal functioning of your team. What would be the best team functioning you could have? Okay, imagine. Some of you might be close to it, some of you might be like a wishful thinking, but whatever it is, I want you to think about my amazing team, if it was the most amazing it could be, would look like this. Okay? 2 minutes each or 3 minutes each.
Claire?
Again. You're going to everyone. So let's just do a couple of minutes of debrief. This time you had the opportunity to ask a question if you wanted to, and you were thinking about different levels of listening. Now, what did anyone notice? Or what did you notice about the kind of team you want as well? What noticing? Somebody who we haven't heard from yet. Stick your hand up.
I'm happy to share two insights. As Ira was sharing, I became more like internally almost like hyper aware of when my mind starts to wander down the track of responses. And then I had sort of a backtrack to the first round, in which that sometimes the question actually triggers for me a deeper, this is like the meta of listening, is even while I'm speaking, I'm listening to what I'm saying and articulating it. I was telling Sarah that articulating it to strangers had me listening to what I was saying at I don't know what level that is, but it made me look at my own situation with sort of a fresh lens.
Great. It's like the gift of self-reflection, right? Sort of, you're more self-aware you become, the more self-conscious you can become, and then you can like go down this whole rabbit hole of self-consciousness and meta self-consciousness. But at some level, once you pay attention, it's still going to be helpful, even though it can be a little bit much also sometimes. Great.
And I
Jeff, you was valid. Yeah.
I actually find, I think exactly what Joanna was saying. It has a power to also be really nerve-wracking. And like really like it's almost like you're on this stage, you're like being criticized, not you're being critiqued, which is like empowering because you're like getting all this feedback, but it also can be terrifying. And so I found myself experiencing both of those emotions as I was talking about a theoretical non-entity.
Right. Any other comments? Yeah, Serena.
Well, I was gonna say, I think like the levels of listening and like focusing on yourself, focusing on someone else's needs, and then sort of looking at the big picture really actually corresponded well to the conversation we had about our ideal team structure, where like you only expect certain things from your subordinates, although you hope that they can elevate to a different type of listening. But a supervisor should be able to hear what people are saying and also look at the big picture and navigate between the two. And so I saw a nice parallel between the levels of listening and the conversation we were having in content.
Great. And it's once you also start looking at the relationships between the people in the team and how people are listening to each other, right? If you sit in a team meeting and someone's saying something and you can hear someone else responding really from level one kind of listening, you start to also see how the relationships between them are also defined by those different levels. And it's definitely something to pay attention to, even as you looking down at the whole picture. Great. Okay, so I want to bring just one more thing before we're going to run out of time. And the next real sort of question that we have to deal with is questions. Let's say that we are really, really fantastic at listening. And let's say we practice listening all the time, which we do. And let's say we become more sensitive and more self-conscious and more self-aware in a good way. And we practice our listening skills. Then we have the next tool that we have on top of the listening is the question that we ask. Because I imagine that most of you have had a situation where you've been in a place where you've been telling something to someone and then they ask the exact right question. Or sometimes they ask the exact wrong question, which just sort of throws you off track and shows that they weren't going in the right direction. It's like, no, that's not really what you needed to ask me. I somehow, you know, and you somehow, when it feels yucky, it's like they've asked the wrong kind of question that closes you down or that pushes you in the wrong direction. And again, when you get asked the right question, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's kind of a liberating sense. Wow, that was so helpful, that question. All you did was you asked me a great question and suddenly you took me to a new place. So we're not going to have too much time to practice good questions right now, but I just want to raise the difference between these different kinds of question words and help you think about which questions do you tend to ask? Which question words do you tend to use the most? And they all do different things, these question words. So I want to just problematize some of them and turn your attention to them so that next time you ask a question, you're, again, a bit more conscious of how they function. So let's look at the question why for a second. Why did you do that? Why did that happen? Why do you think that happened? You know, this is the situation. All these kinds of why questions. Why is a closed question word that I want to say can be very intimidating and is actually, it can be clarifying, but it can also be intimidating. And I want you to just think about your use of the question why, because in my experience, especially with a team, the question why can be very powerful, but also very intimidating. So think about when you use the question why. It's also a closed question because it drives towards a very specific closed answer. Why did that happen? Why is that the situation? There's always an answer to a why question. And it's intimidating because people assume like, oh my God, maybe I'm not going to have the right one, the right answer that you're looking for. When is also a closed question. Obviously, it's a bit simpler. There's usually an answer to it. you know, I think it drives in a very particular direction, and it's when you have a very specific need of the when question. What and how are your friends? What and how are your friends for good questions? Because they open up the answer. They're not closed. They allow for people to explain themselves. They allow for the story to come out. So, I mean, it depends how you use it. If you say, what were you thinking? What the hell were you thinking? That's already has within it, you know, enough power to be, to be a difficult question or a powerful question. But what you could say, what were you thinking? What was going on with that? What was the meaning behind this? What was that about? What allows you to go in an open way? And also how did that work? How did that serve you? How do you think that's going to be the best thing? Right? With the right kind of tone, how and what can really, really help you. Who is also a very clear question. What else is also your friend? What else allows you to get deeper, deeper, deeper? So I'm just putting these question words here for you to think about. And I want to ask you to do one final thing before we're going to properly wrap up. And what I want you to do is I want you to, everybody take a couple of minutes, go to your chart with your people in your team, and think about a question that you want to ask each person that will help you learn something about that person and their role. Okay? If you had a chance to talk to them tomorrow, next week, whenever you get a chance to talk to them, what's a question that you want to ask them? Okay? And in a question that will help build the relationship, that will help you really listen to them. Okay? So you're going to look for a question that is a nice, open, curious question that will help you build that relationship. Okay? So just take a minute. You can turn your screen off if you want to do that. And look at each person in your team and write a question that you want to ask them. Go with your curiosity. Anything. You don't have to share it with us, so it doesn't matter. Write yourself a question. We'll be wrapping up in a minute. So you've asked yourself a question. You're going to ask that person a question. I'm just going to notice that I will be around for the next 10 to 15 minutes, so you don't have to rush off. I know people have other things to do. You're welcome to obviously go back to your regular life, but I will be here for the next 10 to 15 minutes to continue this conversation. I'd love to chat with anyone who wants to stay on. But let's just finish up. So you've written down one question for each person on your org chart or your little team diagram. And the other thing I want you to take away, which I'm going to ask you to send to me, is to think about one or two things that you can do now to help your team by listening to them and asking the right questions. What are things you actually want to do? How are you going to listen better in some form to your team? And what I'd love you to do is to literally send me an email with one or two of those things that you plan to do. This is my email address. I'm not going to grade you. I'm not going to check up on you, but as a commitment and accountability point, I will offer you the opportunity to send me an email with 1 to 2 things that you now think you could do to your team or with your team to listen to them better. And thanks to everybody for joining us. And come back next week, we're going to talk about giving feedback to your team. That is always a kicker. Good to see you all. Thank you.